we've got people joining the call at the moment, which is great. Great to see everybody. A few names I recognize. Hi, Ben. Hi, Daniela. We'll give everybody a few minutes to come in. I think some people need to register before they can actually come in, so it takes a second. Zoom always likes to update as well at the start of a call, which is kind of ridiculous. I always want to find the product manager who made that decision.
Yeah, they should at least give you that and do it after this call or do it at the end of the day option. The same way as my Mac does. It's like, would you like
Yeah,
to update now? No, I'm in the middle of something. Do
yeah,
it when I go to bed tonight.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Okay, so you got 16 people in the call, which is great. And I'll do a bit of housekeeping as well. Once we've given it a few minutes, I'll do a bit of housekeeping.
Maybe those in the call, in the chat though, maybe if you've got any burning questions, you can fire them in now. We can, before we get into the main meet, we can
Definitely.
walk around them, or just tell us where you are or where you work. Give us some context.
Yeah, we were
Yeah,
just beforehand whether it was going to be mostly kind of heads of people who are totally new into product, quite a range. It looks like we've got quite a range, so give us a shout, let us know where you are in that.
definitely. Oh,
The chat is
chat should be
closed.
open. Is it saying it's closed? Let's have a look. I've got two. Oh, how do I do this then? Let's have a look.
Don't know, but I can see Laura's just said something in chat. So
Okay.
Working?
That's in the
Yeah,
Q&A.
it should be open.
Oh, that's Q&A. Okay.
Hang on, here we go. Everyone, there we go. So let's see to use the chat. Hopefully that's working. Everyone see that?
I can back to it.
Yeah, so maybe let's have a look. Okay. Okay, only Q&A possible. So let's stick with Q&A then. Thanks. Laura's just put that. So let's stick with Q&A. So if you have a question, please add it to the Q&A rather than on the chat. As Mehdi and a couple of others have just said that the chat seems to be closed and so chat plans. Okay, here we go. I've added everyone. So actually you can do it either. Attendees can chat with everyone. Okay, I think I've sorted that. Good. So I will monitor the chat and the Q&A. So please feel free to add stuff. And I can see everybody is chatting away, which is great. Okay, so it's 5 past. So let's get started. We've got a good number of people here. So thanks everybody for joining, and thanks to Phil, Bex, and Saskia for volunteering their time today to join us on this webinar. So first 100 days. I chose 100 days because it was kind of a big thing at the time politically in the UK. The government has been in power for 100 days. Lots of people talk about 100 days. Sometimes this is framed as kind of 30, 60, 90 days. So we can anywhere in that time frame, but basically the first few months in a product role. So great to have you along. So I'm going to ask everybody to just introduce themselves quickly. So I'm going to start. Saskia, could you maybe kick us off and just introduce yourself?
Yeah, hello, I'm Saskia. Nice to see you, everyone. I have worked in product for about 9 years across government, fintech, and health tech. Particularly over the last few years, I've kind of specialized in early stage startups, so really helping teams grow their product function from the very early days, oftentimes as the first PM hire. Love businesses that have a social impact, and I've learned a lot, many of which of those lessons have been through mistakes. So I'm very excited to share all of those with you today.
Best way of learning. Best way of learning. Bex, can you introduce yourself quickly?
Yeah, sure. So I always say the same thing when I introduce myself because it really helps understand just how long I've been doing this. When I started in product management wasn't really a title outside of FMCG. So I had really stupid titles like executive producer and things like that. But I've always been doing the same thing since around 99, 2000. I've worked across all different types of org sizes, org types. I did about 10 years in finance in terms of banking and payments. And then I exited waving a flag of relief into climate tech. So I've the last 2 full-time roles I had were in climate tech startups, and now I'm doing a little bit of product consultancy. But I'm very happy to talk around if anybody wants to reach out the craziness that is the recruitment market at the moment as well. So that's where I'm at.
Thanks, Bex. And Phil.
So if we go back far enough, I'm an engineer, but I'm an engineer who was led by a managing director who was a former product manager, who was called a product manager all the way back in the 80s, Bex.
Wow.
But this was in the US. He was a Brit who moved to the US, then came back. So I learned product work as an engineer and then became the first product manager as we were acquired because someone needed to be it and they needed someone from the SLT to take that role on. And then I found my home. And I've kind of stayed there ever since. I'm now a player turned coach. So I'm a product leadership coach working with product people, bringing that experience from tiny 15 people companies up to, I think the last one was 220,000 people, 43 billion euro. I was a small corner of it, trying to modernize that organization. And yeah, I typically work, I guess, with that scale up space. And I like really complicated domains, like IoT is my favorite space. Like hardware, software, connectivity, when it all gets just a mess, that's when I really love it because it's about creating value in an elegant way.
Brilliant. Thanks, Phil. So really nice range of experiences across the panel. I'm Tim Wilkinson, so I run a company called Product Heads. We're primarily a specialist product recruitment company. I'm an ex-product manager. I've run product at organizations, kind of large organizations like the UN, pretty kind of large organization, works in a sort of in a very different way to most corporations, and also small startups, so really small startups, but primarily kind of SaaS early stage startups. Amazing. So yeah, great to have everybody here today. Just quick housekeeping. If you've got questions, please throw them on the Q&A. Thanks, Ben, for your question. I will fold them into the conversation as we go. Just to kick us off then, just be good to get everybody's thoughts on why it's so critical in the sort of first few months of a product role to try and get that sort of landing right, to try and set things up for yourself properly. So who wants to go first? Bex, do you want to dive in?
Sure.
Go for it.
I always talk about the honeymoon period when I talk around when you first land. There's like, and I haven't really timed it. I think it's different depending on the complexity of the tech stack and the industry and the level of ambiguity, you know, depending on like where things are. But there is this period. It's like a non, you know, sort of timed period where you've got fresh eyes and you can see things for what they are. I often talk about when I did my first degree, which was actually in art and music. And one of the things I did as part of that was I did sculpture, and I really enjoyed doing sort of 3D sculptures. And if I put a mirror on my sculpture, I could immediately see how crap it was, immediately. Whereas before I put the mirror on it, it looked perfectly fine. Everything was in proportion, it was in the right place. And then you realize that the nose was skew or what have you. And I think that period when you first land in that honeymoon phase, when you can see all the faults and you can see all the disconnects between, like, why is product calling something X and commercial just don't understand what you're talking about? And why, when we talk on a regular basis, an MBR or a monthly review, do we use the certain language? It just isn't resonating with the C-suite. And you can just see the disconnect. You can see the communication issues. And I think that moment, write for you know, furious notes and like be curious and try to hold back on judgment. And I'm saying that because I am the worst at that, but really try to listen and use those fresh eyes and try to build out on ideas of what you're going to do with those fresh eyes, to hold on to it for as long as possible and not forget the things that you're seeing, but hold off, I would always say, on doing anything drastic until you started to embed and understand why some of those things might be the way they are. There's history, there's people, you know.
Yeah, it's such an important point. I think, I mean, you're absolutely right. There's that sort of superpower, isn't there, when you first join, where, you know, you haven't you haven't completely sort of you know, taken on everything that you know, people that have been there for a long time have taken on, and you don't understand all that history, and it gives you that clarity. But I think you're absolutely right. Often things are a certain way for a reason, and until you understand that reason, it's kind of not great to dive into quickly. Saskia, how about you? Particularly kind of from an early stage perspective, yeah, what are your kind of reflections on that sort of criticality of the first few months and weeks in a role?
Absolutely. Sorry, my dog's chosen this time to start barking, but hopefully he's not on the audio.
They can jump in, it's fine.
What do you think, Brett? No, I think particularly when you're in an early stage startup, you've got really small teams. Typically things are quite informal. Information's not necessarily written down. If it is, it's already a million years out of date because things move so fast. So it's really quite critical to establish curiosity early on and kind of set the tone that as a product manager, as a product person, that kind of is your job. It's to stay curious, to kind of interview people and constantly be kind of questioning in a really positive way. I almost like to think of it as before you even start to look at your users for your product, start to look at the users within the company. Who are your internal users? How do they work? How do they think? So that first 100 days really allows you to, as you say, with this kind of almost like a consultant's perspective, you're coming in fresh eyes. You can see how things are structured today. You can see what's working and what's not working. But also because you're new, people expect you to be asking lots of questions, to be kind of challenging. And there's maybe a little bit more grace in that really early stage for you to ask those questions. But once you've established that as a habit and actually, establish that you are somebody who's going to be asking lots of questions, it kind of sets you up for more success later on. I think that can be quite important.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. You almost have that grace period is again really powerful, isn't it? Because you can ask loads of questions that potentially somebody that's been there for ages wants to ask, but feels a bit silly asking because they feel like they should know the answer. But everybody around the table's feeling like that. But I guess you have that confidence when you're new to ask those questions.
And ask the customer as well.
Yeah.
Like if you get in front of the customer early and you can ask those questions and you can find out some stuff that, why did we never ask that before?
I saw a really great post once. It was somebody who worked in customer service, and they said, I've realized that every single time my colleague messes up, they say, I'm so sorry, it's my first day. And people are much more forgiving. It's that kind of same
Yeah. But it only works for a certain period of time. So Phil, what are your thoughts on that, and how can you make that work?
When you asked the question at the start, I had a list, and then like everyone's given all my answers. So what do I add on to there? What do I add on? Use it as a time to build relationships. So that curiosity is a great opportunity to build those relationships, to have those internal conversations, those external conversations. Like there's a product manager I'm coaching at the moment who is just about to go on a tour of a load of clients, and he's going along and basically saying, I'm new, I know nothing, tell me about your business, help me understand so I can help you. At the same time, he's going along with the sales team who want to be able to talk about what's going on, and so he's building a relationship there. In fact, one of my favorite kind of onboarding tactics is just go out on the road with the sales team, like go and spend time with them. Like often our biggest fight as a product manager is with the commercial team, especially in B2B. If you can get a salesperson that's essentially your sponsor and your mentor who's helped you come into the organization, you've already got a bunch of the team on the side. And so kind of really focusing on the relationship part and asking the questions, that grace period to kind of see it through new eyes, but also to just ask the simple questions because you're not expected to have the answer. Yeah. And I know there's an argument of, oh, well, surely we need to be delivering value immediately. If your leaders got it right and you're not in a super small team, then actually there should be a bit of grace period where you can get away with not while you're getting on board, so that once you are expected to really press the button, you just accelerate at warp speed, and you've got that time to get ready for that instead of just sink or swim.
Yeah, I think that's great. Thanks, Phil. I think you're right. So that idea of just spending the time initially to invest and build relationships around the organization. Laura had, there's a couple of questions which we'll pick up on a little bit down there. Laura was asking about how you can call out observations in a way that is non-confrontational and avoids defensiveness. And I think actually, Phil, you sort of partly answered that in terms of, building up those relationships, asking the questions with fresh eyes. And I think just disarming and sort of saying, can you explain to me why this is done in this way, or can you help me to understand? I think is maybe a way of sort of trying to do that.
Yeah, it's don't ask why. In fact, I would go back to it's that we are always taught to get to why, but if you read Chris Voss's Never Split the Difference, he explains why is a really bad word. It puts people on the defensive. It feels slightly aggressive, but what were you trying to achieve? Angle. Can you explain why it's or what the purpose of this was? Like that simple. You can always rephrase a why into a what or a how question.
Yeah.
How did we get here? That is a lot. It tends to be a lot less defensive.
Yeah. So that's great. Thanks, Phil. So what should I be thinking about if let's start at a sort of IC level. If I'm just about to join, I've just started my new role, and I've kind of, it's day 1 or 2. Hopefully I've got my laptop. I've probably got 2 or 3 logins, but I'm still trying to log into the myriad of other systems, half of which I don't even know exist yet. What should I be thinking about? How do I plan for the next few kind of weeks and months? Are there any, what should be my priorities? Saskia, do you want to, and then I'll come to you, Phil. Sorry, go on, Saskia.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's really tempting when you come in and you see all the things and you kind of go, oh my God, what have I walked into? Because the interview process is never quite reflective of what an organization is truly like. They are selling themselves as much as you are. You walk into that role and you kind of go, ooh, okay, I can see where things aren't quite working here. It's really tempting to walk straight into the door and go, okay, here's what I think. We're going to change this. We're going to do this. You guys aren't doing sprints. Let's put those in today. Drop that part of the product. That's clearly delivering no value. That is a really tricky thing to do before you've built trust. So I think the very first step I always try to do is play back what I'm seeing in a way that helps people almost have that same ability to step back and see it in a really kind of clear perspective. So I had a role where joined, the really strong message I kept getting from leadership was, how can we deliver faster? A very common message. How can we deliver faster? The engineers just aren't delivering fast enough. I'm going, I'm pretty sure they're coding as fast as they can. But when I spoke to the different teams, I spoke to sales, I spoke to customer support, I spoke to the customers, they were working on 23 projects and they had 3 developers. So I'm amazed anything was getting done. It is a testament to the team that anything was getting done. So I literally wrote down the 23 projects, attempted to put it into, a roadmap format, but basically showed you've got 23 projects stacked.
Yeah.
This is what you're doing today. Is this what you are intending to do today? How does this feel looking at this, kind of seeing it all in one page? And I think playing it back in that way, although there is an element of that potentially coming off confrontationally, and you do have to, like you say, be careful about how you present it. I think it allowed them to go on that journey with me and kind of go, oh, I suppose we are doing all of that, aren't we? We are onboarding 4 clients at the same time as we're trying to improve that and sunset that. So, okay, right. So what do we do now? And then they're kind of looking for you to support. Yeah. They're kind of ready for you to come in and help and kind of offer some change. So I think building the trust that you've really understood the situation and then really play back what's happening now before you come in and start changing everything, so that they can kind of come on that journey with you, can be quite important.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, thanks, Saskia. And Bex, what are your thoughts around that initial orientation and figuring out what to do first?
Yeah, I think there's always for me like a perception filter that you need to put on when you land in role. So the reason I wrote that down or thought about that was because of what you said, Saskia, around like the perception of the engineering team and what they do. But if you sort of swivel that back to product, I sort of wrote a couple of things down in terms of the things I've heard in the past. Product never deliver on time. No one knows what XX product is or what it does or why we've got it. Product's just getting in the way. Those types of things that you hear. And to a certain extent, you could dive in either as an IC or as a product leader to try and, figure out what those problems are. But I found through, learning the hard way, more often than not, to actually just put a bit of a perception filter onto all of that and try to figure out where that's coming from. Why is there this perception that XXX is being said, like product never deliver on time? And more often than not is because they are over-promising and under-delivering. It's context, it's presentation, it's communication, it's how they're putting things across. And so I would say that's a really good technique to use, is to think about the perception that people are having, the perception that the customers have. What are they saying? And what are the themes that are coming out of your customer insight avenues, and the perception that a customer might have versus a prospect of what it is that's happening and what your product does.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Bex. And Phil, sorry, you had your hand up when I first asked the question. It sounded like you wanted to really dive in on this one.
I'm going to take a completely different approach to answering this. Why the heck are you planning it yourself if you're the product manager? Why is your leader not sitting with you with already some good idea before you even join, and then sanitizing it and refining it with you? Like, the day you join, there should be some onboarding already planned. Like, whether it's getting them out with the sales team for the next month, just to get to understand and build those relationships. One of my favorite approaches in my old life was we were multi-site organization. I'm sat in the UK. Most of my team are sat in Germany. I would take a week within the first 2 months and just take them on a tour of the whole business, like introduce them to everyone face to face. Now, this is pre-COVID, so I know it's changed a little bit, but I've been a remote worker for 20 years. So this was, to me, just normal. Like, once you've got the whites of someone's eyes, it's so much harder to say no or ignore them. And so getting my team out to introduce them and tell them a little bit about each other, kind of just that little human introduction. And essentially you're saying, as the leader, this is one of mine. They can take cash out of my political bank. If you'd have done it for me, do it for them. And so building that onboarding with them collaboratively, but with a strong plan. Like, it's even a question I ask in the interviews: what's your 30, 60, 90-day plan? And in fact, if they don't say get to know the people in the 30 days, they're not getting hired by me, because everything else flows from the people. You can understand the technology, the product, the market, everything else from the other people in the business.
Yeah, great. Thanks for that. And I think that touches on a few things. I mean, you're absolutely right. I think companies really should have a proper onboarding plan, and we can get into that in a second. But I think also that whole thing about getting out and meeting people. Actually, there's a couple of things. I think, one of the things I think is always a good thing to do is just to get around the business and ask like 3 standard questions: what's going well, what isn't going well, and how can I help? Whether that's across like sales, marketing, engineering, and then just try and match up and see if there are any kind of themes across that. And it's an easy way of getting face time with people and starting to understand the business straight away. I'm just going to jump to some of the questions, because I think it overlaps with some of these things. Swati is asking, great question. Not sure we got time to answer it fully, but on Saskia's point earlier, what do you do if you find that there isn't any strong product leadership and you're having to build product culture from scratch? I'm sure we've probably all been in that position at some point. Any thoughts? Who wants to jump in on this one?
I think we should let Phil go first, because we keep leaving him to the last.
Well, obviously call me and I'll come and help the organization get it in place. Although the chances are, if you're getting hired there, then I might already be there already trying to help the C-suite figure it out. But if I take the tongue in cheek out of that one, I guess the question is, what is your role in that context? Because if you're an IC, you probably got limited ability to affect that change. I'm going to be blunt with you. If you're in a leadership role, then you're there to build that. If you're one of the challenges you get is, as if you're the first product manager, And there's a really great blog post about being the first or the second first product manager. If you're that first one, then frankly, you've just got a lot of pain to go through. The founders are working the way they've worked. They've got their mindset. They are the de facto product leader, but they probably have no idea how to do it. They're trying their best. And so generally it comes back to the answer number one, build trust.
100%. Yeah. I think one thing I would add to that, though, is quite often if you are early on in that journey of understanding like strategy and vision and the difference between the two, there is a level of conflation that tends to happen around those. I've seen it so many times. It's almost like nobody is using ChatGPT with how they should be, right? Like, what is your vision? And more often than not, the vision is being set by the SLT, but they haven't got a Scooby-Doo what the strategy is. They don't know how they're going to get there. They don't know the measures they're going to take, the processes they're going to put in place, the things they're going to build, how they're going to build them, how they're going to target, etc., etc. And I think like offering up those questions and asking those questions and positioning them in a way that is inclusive, and you want to collaborate and partner with as many people who want to be involved as possible to unpick some of those really sticky, chunky things. I think it's a great way to build trust, because you're showing that you've got a different way of thinking about things, so people will trust you to ask the difficult questions, and you're showing that you want to achieve what they want to achieve by trying to unblock the things that are just naturally there, blocking them. And I think, you know, we talk about building trust, but there's sort of very specific ways that different types of disciplines and different roles within a company, there's different things that you need to do or different ways that you need to establish trust. And that would be just a few examples of how you could establish trust with leadership, specifically leadership who've had the product hat on before you got there.
I think sometimes the challenge, though, can be that they will essentially tell you to get back in your lane and deliver, because they want someone more operational. That's a challenge I've encountered. They eventually get there with that second product manager, that second first. That is my experience, that the first one has all those conversations and gets a lot of pushback, which can be a challenging culture to work in.
Saskia, this is an area that you've been in before, and I think it looks like Swati's saying she's an IC and the first product hire.
Yeah.
So yeah. Any thoughts how we can help, Swati?
Well, first of all, I'm going to put two articles in the chat, one of which is the Why You Want to Be the Second First PM article. I think it's brilliant, and I read that after I'd been the first PM for the first time, and I'll be honest, it didn't work out for me the very first time I did it. I ended up having a really honest conversation with the CEO and saying, you know, you're not ready to hand this over. You want somebody who's delivery, execution, you know, how do we get this project over the line in time? But you're not looking at kind of strategically how to really shift this business and think about that kind of product mindset. I guess for me, one of the things that's shifted over the years is really trying to, again, think of your CEO, think of your founders, whoever it is that you're reporting into, and trying to kind of bring on that journey as a user and really try to understand their perspective, try to understand where they're coming from, and figure out the outcomes that they're trying to get to. Because in some ways you can see product as a method of getting to that outcome. And if you can kind of frame it more as, you know what, you point us in the direction and let me help you get there. You know, the methodology, that's my area of expertise, and I can bring the team around on that. But you help me with the vision. I think that can sort of frame it in a way that people are a little bit more comfortable with. And again, in these articles I'll share, there's actually some great tools for how you sort of delegate different responsibilities and decide who owns what, because you'll have very, very different experiences, particularly in kind of small startups with that first PM hire. Some you will come in and they go, God, I'm so glad you're here. I don't know what I'm doing. Help. And just kind of want to throw it all over the fence. But more often than not, you've got people who say, you know, I absolutely, definitely want to be involved, still kind of represent that customer voice. I know these customers so well. I've built this company on that basis. However, I know nothing about design. I know nothing about engineering. I know nothing how to get the best of those teams. So I really need you to step up in that respect. So it's about finding the balance of your role. Like I say, I'll find them and then pop them in the chat so you can have a little look, because people before me have explained it even better.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Saskia. And I think it always, So one of the things I always come to on these kind of questions is, to some degree, you almost have to use your product manager skills with the internal folks, almost like they're your customer, try and understand what represents value to the CEO or the person that hired you, and how you can be helpful in terms of supporting them in their role. I think that's that's a really kind of important thing. Okay, so I'm just going to quickly check on the chat. So what does so early stage is different, I think, to larger organizations. I think there's definitely a scenario when you join an early stage and they haven't necessarily thought about onboarding, and as Phil said, they should be thinking about onboarding. There's lots of great data that shows how good onboarding process impacts PMs, not just in terms of ramping up quickly, but also their likelihood that they're going to stay around for a couple of years and be able to add real value. What would we hope to see in a kind of good onboarding process? Bex, do you want to go first on this one?
Yeah, I think I've seen some pretty great ones and some pretty shocking ones over my time. I think good looks like thinking about the outcome you want that role to achieve, and actually sitting down and creating a pathway that achieves that outcome. So, for example, in one of my climate tech startups I worked in, they wanted people in most of the roles to have a really good understanding of the really complicated tech that was what we did. So it was renewable energy storage and batteries. So we literally went back to like physics 101, and we were told about how batteries worked, and topology of like these massive 20 million bucks sort of sites and how they worked, etc. That was great from a technology point of view, but not so great from, it was so overweighted on the tech that it sort of forgot to think about how we work. It's forgot to think about how we communicate. It didn't think about how you're going to set people up for success that maybe aren't involved in that day to day, and how do they understand what's happening? How do they get involved, and giving them a chance to the beauty of an onboarding process that's good, in my opinion, is one that actually acknowledges that the people that you're onboarding are in that honeymoon phase. How do you capture the stuff that they're thinking? How do you capture the ideas? How do you capture that, the perception filter that they have, that they can see things that you just don't see? So I would say setting people up for success, but capturing the observations you're going to get from people who are going through that. And if you're onboarding on a fairly regular basis, you're always going to have that wonderful fresh eyes if you're capturing it in a way that's meaningful and useful.
Yeah, great. Phil, what are your thoughts?
So I know Christina Diodi is a big fan of what he calls an onboarding boot camp, where you actually get dedicated time, like a week or something like that. And I think that works well if you're, say, in a large organization where you can put a cohort together. Like if you look at Germany, people start and end on the first, or the start and end of the month. It's nice and clean. So you can actually put cohorts together. Come to the UK, not quite so simple. It's whatever day of the week it happens to be. But you might choose to not start them until you've got a few people, so you can get some I guess economies of scale there, especially if you're recruiting a few people. My favorite thing is buddying up, like finding the last person in that function that onboarded and buddying them, because they've probably got, I like to think of it as the secret playbook. Like they went through that discovery process. They've probably written it down in a Notion document somewhere, and they can share it with you, and you can become the new custodian and update it and find the new golden nuggets, the new ways of working, like the way things that aren't in the official document, but like, this is how we get stuff done here. This is how you get those credentials for that system. And I like possibly even multiple buddies, like someone commercial, especially if you're an enterprise or B2B type stuff, as well as that other buddy. Like if you've got the last one in the function and someone more commercial, they'll just open the doors.
Yeah, great. Saskia, did you want to jump in on that?
Reiterating what we've said before, introductions to everyone, just as many face-to-face and coffees and whatever as you can get, and access to everything. I've had startups, teeny tiny, there's not all the bureaucracy and all of the, having to get, but it's taken like 6 months to get onto the product analytics system. So I'm going, all right, well, engineer, I'm going to come and sit and watch over your shoulder because I need this. It's not a good use of anyone's time. So access to everything as fast as you can.
I mean, I think it's a really important point because, again, even in this conversation, naturally we've been thinking about like the big things, right? About how you build trust and all that sort of stuff. But actually, when you first join a company in that first week, it's a really stressful time, and even just knowing really simple things like what people do for lunch, or what the rules are around kind of going home, or like all these kind of things can be really quite destabling for people, I think. And so access is a classic one, because I don't think I've ever joined a company where it's been really nailed down. And there is nothing worse, as you say, than like having to bug the CTO for like a particular password, like time and time again, and suddenly a month has gone past and you still don't have it. It's just really, I think it reflects badly on the organization, but it's also a waste of everyone's time.
I think the flip side of that is if you can get access to everything, it just gives you the chance to go and self-serve and dig in. To see, even if you can get access to old versions of things, you can see the journey they've been on, what are the things that have fallen off over time. As much access as you can get. I'd really push for it.
That's embracing that curiosity again, because the curious will go dig and find all that history and look it up and trying to understand. And so if you're embracing curiosity as the new person joining, at some point that curiosity slows down. And if the access suddenly turns up, then you're not going to go and look.
Yeah, definitely. I used to, in a previous team, I ran a Trello board for onboarding, and I had columns for like first week, first month. This is how you do X, Y, and Z, right? This is how you book holiday. This is how what you need to do if you're feeling ill and you can't come in. And part of everybody's role when they joined was to update that and maintain that Trello board. So, if they came across a situation that they couldn't find the answer for in the Trello board, then they could find out the answer and add it. And so that in that way, it kind of evolved over time, which is quite a good way of doing it. So one of the kind of obviously the sort of critical relationships for product is obviously with engineering and the engineering team. And there is a tendency, I think, for people joining to want to sort of start shipping something as quickly as possible, get involved in building stuff as quickly as possible. One of the questions actually from Ben, one of the first questions is, how do you build trust with engineering? Just really interested to talk around that a little bit, and what people's views are in terms of kind of getting involved in the kind of day-to-day processes and rituals, and getting to a point where they can kind of ship their first feature or fix a bug or something like that. Phil, kick us off on this one.
I'd say start by giving trust. Like, there's a load of stuff already in flight. Like, someone's done a load of discovery. They've decided stuff's going to happen. Like, don't go in and just say, we're not going to do that anymore because I need to now go and understand it and discover it. It's like, let that happen. Trust that the engineers have also been involved in that discovery and therefore know what's needed, and kind of you're showing that you're trusting them to actually do stuff and kind of bring some continuity to the team. But equally, just go and spend time with, like, it comes back to those introductions. I remember that example of where I used to take people on a tour. I remember two engineers sitting next to each other. And one of them, after I introduced them to the person introduced my new PM to the person sitting next to him, made the comment that he'd sat next to him for 20 years and I knew this guy better than him. And the reality was, I'm not actually a naturally interpersonal person. I essentially have a Rolodex, like a CRM of people, and I kind of take notes on what's their parents' names, their kids' names, their dogs' names, birthdays, etc. I used to literally take notes. Now it's more codified in here.
Yeah.
But by just making those little introductions, like taking it to a personal level, my team were able to then accelerate getting that trust with the engineers, like, because they had the trust with me. So there was a transference. So that was one way of building it. But showing curiosity, asking them about the technology, why it works. I like to call it speaking geek. speaking geeking out, like heck, I've got a master's degree in engineering. I am an engineer if you go back far enough, so I can geek out with the best of them. But if you go and engage in the things they care about, you're more likely to build trust.
And just that you don't have to have a master's in engineering, because engineers, they like to explain what they do as well. Everyone does, right? So you're just as welcome to go over and say, please explain this to me like I'm 5. And they tend to be better at it than people give them credit for. So
I tend to ask for boxes and arrows conversation, is what I call it, with as many people as possible. So we'll sit there either in Miro if we're remote, or on a whiteboard if we're not, and literally get them to tell me the story, their own personal story of their involvement in the tech stack, what the architecture looks like, what talks to what, how does it work, what's broken, what their aspirations are. I think as well, I spent, like I said earlier, 10 years in finance, and I'm not anti-finance. I would just say that there's a lot of people who aren't creative technologists who go in finance. They're just happy to deliver. Whereas I was very, very lucky to work with very creative people in a couple of climate tech startups. And the amount of boxes and arrows conversation I was able to have there versus how many I was able to have in a much bigger financial org, it's just my point. Like, you find the people who want to have the conversation, really start to dive into what they're trying to do, their view of the world, and you get a much broader understanding of what's going on, what's going to happen next, what limitations are there, what's clipping our wings, with regards to our tech stack, that perception filter we talked about. Is it actually a monolith, or, is the perception that it's a monolith because they've been trying to fix a certain thing that's just slightly on the side, and every time they change something over here, it breaks something over there? Where is all of that coming from? And the more people you have that conversation with and start to understand their world and see the world through their eyes, I think just that curiosity and that willingness to spend the time, I think, really helps to establish trust. And then on the personal side, I'm totally with Phil on that one. I'm a Miro notes taker because I like to be able to search the things that I've written, which you can do. But also, there you go, you're old school. For me, it's around just random, because I watch sci-fi and I love geeky TV. And so I'm more often than not going to find a number of people within the engineering org who want to talk to me about some of the weird stuff I'm happy to watch on television, which helps because then you've got a connection.
Don't be afraid to use cringy icebreakers to find those connections as well. I have used some. The best ones are where you ask someone for a really strong opinion. So if there's something you could delete from the world, what would it be? And occasionally you'll get someone who says, hunger, and they're trying to go on a moral one. And yeah, fair enough. We probably should delete hunger from the world. But most people like the DC comics because they're terrible. Or and then you've got
Love Island or something. Yeah.
Someone once genuinely took over the entire stand-up to talk about backpacks on the tube and why they must be banned. I've never known someone so passionate. But then they're now the backpacks person. You've got.
I can relate to that. But they are my kind of person. So yeah. But I love that. So yeah, great. So it sounds like the primary thing is just trying to connect on a human level with teams, and it seems like that is the case. Everybody seems to be saying that's the case across the organization. So ultimately, just trying to build those relationships. And there's a question actually on the chat about doing that with your direct manager. So obviously that's a critical relationship there that needs to be built. Any kind of thoughts or tactics around building that relationship with your direct manager? It could be a CEO if it's a very small company, or it could be head of product or lead product manager, or it could be a director of product, depending on where you are in the org. Any kind of thoughts on that? How you sort of build and understand that relationship so you can set yourself up for success? Who's going to jump in first? Phil, do you want to go first? I feel like I've left you to the end a few times, so we'll start with you.
It's an interesting one. I always played the card of try and take it out of the office a little bit, try and get personal, like go for a beer, go for a coffee, that sort of thing. I know that can disadvantage on gender lines. Like it's typically easier for two guys to go for a beer. It seems to be, it's not misconstrued the wrong way. So it's about finding that safe space. Like maybe a coffee just before work type thing. So it's it's in that more safe space, like it's almost like you're doing a stand up with your boss.
Yeah.
Can be a great way of just finding that way of not when you're outside of the politics a little bit, I find
Yeah.
just kind of making it simpler, just finding that personal connection again. It's like, it's what have we got in common? Like maybe it is DC comics are terrible. Maybe it's the fact that Deep Space Nine is by far the best Star Trek out there because it's darker and it's grimmer, and that is my favorite, by the way. Or maybe you just love building Lego. Like my favorite icebreaker is to get them to. I have like 1,000 pieces of like people pieces, and they'll build an avatar and then describe it. It's a great way of breaking the ice. Just, okay. But that's a group type thing. But we kind of find a piece of common ground because there's always something, and it doesn't have to be work related. It's something random usually.
And that's great. Thanks for that. And what kind of questions, should somebody be asking in order to understand metrics of success? Because I often find there's sometimes a gap between what's maybe articulated formally and what is actually what are actually the metrics of success. So how do you maybe tease that out of a manager or your line manager? Who wants to jump in? Bex, do you maybe have a go at this one?
Sure. I mean, I think it's really interesting. It depends on the level and the discipline of the boss. Like it's a really tricky one in terms of Pablo's question. And it's a great question. It's just like, obviously, I'm really surprised you didn't say it depends, Phil. It depends on, I'm going to say it for you, the person that we're talking about. But, if they are in the product discipline, let's say, as one assumption to start us off, for me, like the metrics they're going to care about are going to be product success. But if they're not in the product discipline, then there's going to be some kind of success metric that you can establish and get a hold of. And for me, it's always going to be, the conversation should be, yes, like what does success look like? But how can I make you look better? Now I'm here doing the role that you've hired me to do, that we hope you chose to hire, that you weren't, coerced to hire for. How can I make you look better? What are the things that you're going to be able to step into now that I'm doing these things? And that's not always going to be the case. Obviously, if you're like, a fifth ICPM hire, it's going to be measures of differentiation. But it's going to still be worth having that conversation, like in terms of where are you trying to get to? Just talk me through like your challenges, the things that you've not quite managed to tap into yet. Like, how can I help unlock some of those things that have got in the way in the past? Like, how can I make a difference? And if you set that stall early and you put in a regular, sorry, but I'm really, really particular about this, you put in the regular one-to-one with your line manager, you own that, you create an agenda, you send that out beforehand, you make notes, you capture the actions for your line manager. I'm really, like, that's what you should do. I do it for my line management. Everyone should do it for theirs. But that's how you measure success, and that's how you're making sure that you're counting against success as you move forward as well.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's great. And I'm with you on the line management thing. I think it's too easy to fall into kind of victim thinking on that. I think it's so important to make sure those things happen and that you're checking in regularly and driving those conversations. And I think it also helps going back to that credibility thing. I think it really helps with that credibility thing if you're proactive and you're driving those conversations. Saskia, your thoughts on that then in terms of line management and just making sure you're identifying what they're looking for in the next, whether it's 3, 6, 9 months or ongoing.
Yeah, I mean, I think hopefully they've done a half decent job with the job spec and they've spelt that out a little bit for you. But I do think Bex did touch on something interesting there, which is were they the person responsible for your hire? That's quite important to establish. If you so well, or somebody else thinks it's the right thing to do, it's a slightly different conversation. And at that point, there's a lot more trust building, and you have to establish that you are here to be a partner in crime, not their competition, even if you are junior to them. But I think, assuming you've established and you're working to someone who wants you to be there, I think it's about just really sitting with them and figuring out what good looks like, and kind of understanding what's in the way of that as well. A bit of a reality check, a bit of a what are the constraints, which you may be able to help with, or you may just need to acknowledge. But I think you're kind of just going into it and establishing that you are someone who understands, things never are quite as glamorous as they seem, and the OKR is big and shiny, but what are the blockers that are in the way, and how can we start to tackle them over time? It just allows you to go in and kind of be seen as somebody who really understands the reality of what product work can be like. The other thing I would say, though, just broadly about making that relationship successful, and again making that first 100 days across the board successful, is communicate, and potentially over communicate to begin with. That might involve sending your manager at the end of each week, here's some of the stuff I did this week, here's the stuff I did this week, or it might be every 2 weeks or every quarter. You can figure out what works with them. But if you make it so that by the time you come to the end of your probation, by the time you come to your performance review, they literally have a weekly list of what you've been up to, or a quarterly list, somewhere they can go to. They have to do nothing. They can go look at it. That's your business case written for them, So make them easier. And the same thing with building trust with engineering, help them with the release notes, help get that out on the Slack channel or the Teams, or, get it out to the company, help increase the visibility of what product are doing, show the value of what you're doing, because engineers often think, oh, nobody wants to know about the tech debt that we worked on. But if you can frame that to the company as, we've now sped up our ability to deliver by 2 times, great. You're the one who's putting it in the terms of the value that people understand, because you know the terms they're thinking of it in, and you're communicating that on their behalf. You're showering them with praise. It's a really positive thing to do. So lots of communication out in the open. Really try and bridge a lot of those gaps that you might have identified early on.
Yeah, amazing. There's a load of really good stuff in SSK. I think, well, first of all, you touched on my pet peeve, which is obviously like job descriptions and also just some of the mess that happens around hiring. And I know this is earlier than when you've started, but I think as a candidate going through interview processes, it's really important to do your due diligence on that stuff and ask questions and understand and make sure that you get some idea about. I mean, I always like to ask at each stage. I like to ask, the different people I meet, what the goals are and what the focus is of the business, because you learn a ton about like how organized the company is by that. Does everybody understand it? Are they articulating it in the same way, or are they all over the place? And parroting back the job description so you get some understanding of, like, is it just a cut and paste job, or have they actually thought about this? Really, really important. But I also really like your points there about like communicating, and you talked about release notes and things like that, which kind of leads me on to my next question, which is, I think when you start in a new role, there can be that kind of imposter syndrome thing, and you don't really understand the culture yet, and am I doing the right things? What could I be doing to add value? And I think there's a load of stuff you can do around and learn the product at the same time, right? If you're helping to write release notes, or helping with support on writing out support docs on the help chat and all that kind of stuff, it's a great way of adding value. It's low risk, but it also helps you to learn the product and be helpful to those teams. Any other thoughts on that? So we've got 5 minutes left. I was keen to just get some ideas on that. Like, what can I be doing? Okay, I'm talking to people and I'm building credibility, and that's really valuable for me, and hopefully it's helpful for them, and we're building the relationships. What kind of tangible things can I be doing to sort of start feeling like I'm contributing and adding value, but also kind of helping around the teams? Bex, maybe do you want to kick us off on that one?
Yeah, I think Saskia hit the nail on the head when she kept coming back naturally to communication, because I think communication is the cornerstone for all of that as you're coming in role. Like we talked at the beginning around how you're listening, like you're not going to judgment, but how you can add or make a difference before you're actually doing anything effectively, like that you've been hired to do in terms of changing the roadmap or questioning the roadmap or anything like that. That is the comms piece. And we talked about that in terms of, do the sales team understand what you're building now, what you're building next? Are you putting the engineering team on a platform to be able to explain the complexities of their world? And are they able to communicate what is happening and why it's happening in a certain way, why something is taking 6 months when somebody in the C-suite for some reason thought it was going to take 1 month, for example. And you're actually making sure that you're just sewing up all of those little holes in comms. That is absolutely something that, you know, thematically you can focus on and be seen to be making an impact, no matter what level your role is. I think that's something that you can dive into. And your example of the release notes, I think, is a really good one. But maybe even, you know, a joined up note to the exec in terms of what are the product team up to, and how are they working, and are there product processes that, you know, are needing a little bit of an overhaul, and have you got plans to improve those? You know, is there a connection between product and commercial? And are you making sure that you're improving the way that you communicate? Are you creating product champion initiative, or are you bridging the gap between those two entities, for example?
Yeah, amazing. Thanks, Bex. And Phil?
So I'm going to kind of try and join a couple of those comments there. Bex also mentioned, how do you make your boss look good? I mean, because the reality is, if you're working for someone, part of your job is to help them be good, and the optics of that, which comes back to the communications. And it sounds siloed. It sounds kind of like we're, you know, it's like our function and how do we make it look better? But the reality is, we're all humans. We want to be successful, and we want to be seen to be successful. So you want to be sharing and communicating and sharing that learning that you're bringing, because you're showing that, one, they hired a good person. But don't forget to also share what's working really well, what you're finding that's good, because that's also another way of saying these people are doing a good job. You know, we're finding some new things. I'm bringing a fresh set of eyes, and I'm seeing the good and the bad. There's a ton of good in here as well. I'm not coming in and saying, oh, you're doing everything terribly, it's all bad. It's like, actually, what I'm helping you to do is go from good to great.
Brilliant.
I distinctly remember almost the shock on the CEO's face in one role I went into, where, you know, I spent some time with the engineering teams. This is one of the how do they deliver faster kind of conversations, and kind of said, right, so what are you going to do? What are you going to change? And I said, well, I actually think there's a lot of magic here right now. What you've delivered to date is phenomenal, with the size of team that you have, you know, with the number of years you've been going, the kind of, you know, the Trustpilot reviews, that, you know, the things we're hearing are fantastic. You're delivering really high quality product, and you're delivering it at speed and high quality. You're not having loads of incidents. There's loads to be praised here. So I'm going to tread really carefully with any changes I make, because I don't want to disrupt that magic. And I haven't yet quite figured out where it is. So I'm going to, whatever I implement, I'm going to do it. You know, I'm not doing it tomorrow. We're going to do it slowly. And he kind of went, okay, yeah. And I think it was the first time in a while he'd stopped to reflect on where they were rather than where he wanted to be. Because, I mean, to be a founder, you constantly have to be thinking so far in the future and the big vision. But, I mean, they've done a phenomenal amount. I wasn't, you know, saying it to make people feel better. It was the truth. And he kind of went, oh, yeah, okay, yeah, maybe there is a bit of magic. And again, saying that explicitly to the engineering team, you guys are fantastic. You've been doing such a good job. I don't want to disrupt this because you're doing something really brilliant. I just want to help. How can I help? What's not working? Where can we make things a little bit easier? Okay, you don't know what the sales team are up to? I'm going to fix that for you. You don't know when our next client's onboarding? Great. How can I help? You've got some regulatory thing you don't understand? I'm going to go read that for you, and I'm going to figure it out. And then you're the unblocker. You're the oil in the machine. You're making things run smoothly. They're the magic. You've given them their flowers. You've given them their crown. So I think there's something really powerful in that. I really like that.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point, Saskia. As well, that thing of not trying to change everything too quickly. I've seen, you know, a number of PMs, you know, bomb out quite early because they've tried to completely change the organization in like their first 3 months of being there, and just hit huge resistance and problems and lost credibility and spent all of their political capital. So I absolutely agree. I think that's such a great thing. To highlight the positives and see what's really working well, and then take your time to work on the challenges. Amazing. It's 1 o'clock, so, or just gone 1, so we're gonna wrap things up. Thank you so much, everybody, for all of your comments and insights. It's been a really great session. I've learned a ton. Hopefully, everybody on the call has also learned a lot. I'm sure they have. It's been really great speaking to you all and hearing your advice and tips and tricks.
Pleasure to
Pleasure.
be. Thanks.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
See you
Have a good
soon.
day.
Bye.